Okay, so a taxonomy refresher. Essentially, a taxonomy is a guide for anyone making capital allocation decisions about which activities can be credibly considered to be contributing to sustainable outcomes. So essentially, it does the legwork of looking at what activities could help achieve a particular environmental objective and establishes credible criteria for the performance of those activities. By doing this legwork, the framework provides clear, credible decision-making tools. This reduces the cost and risk of decisions to allocate capital to such activities. And by reducing that cost, friction, and risk, it intends to make it easier for capital to flow to them. The current scope of work is to develop definitions and criteria for activities that can contribute to the goals of climate change mitigation, adaptation, and resilience in the agricultural and forestry sectors. We have also recently commenced work on developing criteria for the energy sector, and work on the construction and building sector will begin early in 2026. So these are some of the use cases for the New Zealand taxonomy, and it's worth noting that the primary users will be financial institutions. We're seeing taxonomies globally being used by bond issuers and insurers as well. Essentially, anyone looking for credible ways to assess sustainability claims and risks. For businesses, the aim is ultimately to increase the quantum of finance available for sustainable activities or transition activities. It's also a framework that can be used to verify sustainability claims and to help tell sustainability stories. So why are we building a New Zealand taxonomy? Taxonomies are in development globally, with over 50 jurisdictions now with them or with them in development, including the EU, China, Singapore, ASEAN region, and Brazil. In many ways, New Zealand is developing a taxonomy in recognition of the fact that we are a small and optional market for capital, and we need to be aligned with the language and frameworks being used internationally. The same goes for ensuring efficient access to markets for our exporters and meeting global customer expectations, which are increasingly using global taxonomies to demonstrate alignment. We also don't want to have the EU or the Australian, for example, taxonomies just blanket applied here. So we're looking to develop a domestic taxonomy where the definitions and the criteria are fit for purpose for New Zealand businesses. Just to clear up any confusions, the New Zealand taxonomy only provides a framework for assessing environmental performance of specific activities. It doesn't and can't assess a company's overall sustainability credentials. It also doesn't assess risk or financial performance of investments. So it's only one aspect of any capital allocation decisions. It doesn't exclude entities from accessing any other types of finance. It's also a voluntary framework, both for financial institutions and for business users. So it's at the discretion of any company if they want to undertake any of the activities that are outlined in the taxonomy criteria, or for any financial institution if they want to use the framework for assessing activities. Finally, the New Zealand taxonomy doesn't proxy for a sector transition plan. It can't give consideration to volume of activities or any other considerations that would be involved in determining a sector mix, and that remains the remit of national level policy. The New Zealand taxonomy is really just one tool doing one job about flowing capital in a much wider landscape of industry action and policy that can support the transition to a lower emissions economy. So I'll just talk briefly to the structure of the New Zealand taxonomy. As we've said, taxonomies define activities which contribute to an environmental objective. And these are the environmental objectives for the New Zealand taxonomy. And they line up with the environmental objectives across key jurisdictions, including in the EU and Australia. And criteria are developed to define activities that contribute to each objective in turn. So as I mentioned earlier, we're currently developing criteria across 3 sectors for activities that can contribute to the first 2 goals: climate change mitigation, so emissions reductions, and criteria for climate change adaptation and resilience activities. It's important to understand that the criteria assess performance against one environmental goal at a time. And this is the structure of all taxonomies globally. And we need to remain consistent with that structure so that investors can use the framework to compare investments across jurisdictions. Fundamentally, taxonomies are a list of economic activities. And there is a methodological approach developed to assessing activities which can contribute to the environmental objective and the overall purpose of the taxonomy. And activities that are included can be classified as green or in transition. But both green and transition activities are New Zealand taxonomy aligned. And the transition classification is increasingly being recognised by global finance frameworks as critical for climate change mitigation because it can support emissions reductions in those industries which are hard to abate, but are significant for social and economic well-being. Many sustainable finance taxonomies, including Australia, the EU, ASEAN, and Singapore, classify both green and transition activities as eligible for climate change mitigation funding through bonds and other financial instruments, including loans. Across major jurisdictions, green bonds and transition bonds are routinely issued to finance both established low emission solutions and projects that help higher emitting sectors reduce emissions. This reflects a growing consensus that financing the transition is as essential as financing already green activities. There are 3 sets of criteria which make up the taxonomy. So there are the substantial contribution criteria, which detail how an activity demonstrates it is making a substantial contribution to the environmental objective, be that climate change mitigation or adaptation and resilience. And then there are do no significant harm criteria and a minimum social safeguards framework, which together provide safeguards to ensure activities which are making that substantial contribution don't do other environmental or social harms. Okay, so just a quick reminder as well about how these criteria have been developed. The New Zealand taxonomy has been and will continue to be developed through a robust and credible process designed in alignment with leading international efforts to develop local taxonomies. And we have 2 main functions supporting this work, as you can see on the slides. So we have the government function and the independent advisory function. And under the independent advisory function, there are 2 key groups: sector-specific technical advisory groups, or TAGs, and the technical experts group, or the TEG. The TAGs provide technical and industry-specific advice to help tailor the criteria so that they are fit for purpose in the New Zealand context. This includes which activities to include in the criteria, thresholds for the performance of those activities, and assessment of possible risks associated with them. The technical experts group looks at the taxonomy from a broader cross-sector perspective, and their focus is on usability and interoperability, especially from the financial sector's point of view, because ultimately the main users of the taxonomy will be banks and investors or asset managers. The members of all of these groups are available on our website. The Ministry for the Environment is the lead agency, and they provide oversight and direction for the work. And the Council of Financial Regulators are also involved, and they provide quality assurance, making sure that the criteria development process has been robust, transparent, and credible. Importantly, neither of those government groups have a say on the criteria themselves. Their job is to make sure that the process we've followed to reach the criteria is sound. The final criteria will be published for the market to voluntarily use. Sometimes we get questions about the government involvement and if this is a policy development process, and I just want to be really clear here that the endorsement of the New Zealand taxonomy is an important credentialising factor for international investors and markets. However, this remains a market-driven and used tool, not a policy process. And this is the process for development. So we started from reviewing drafts from benchmark taxonomies, especially Australia, given the directive for strong alignment with their taxonomy, and also the EU, Singapore, and several others. There was also foundational work done on the methodology by the TEG early in 2025, and this sets the direction for activities that can be included in the taxonomy and how they can be classified as green and transitional. So the groups begin with these draft criteria and they revise them to ensure that they are fit for purpose in New Zealand, add any New Zealand specific activities or measures, and set thresholds based on our sector's performance and available data. And this work really cycles between the two technical groups, but ultimately the TEG are responsible for endorsing the criteria, and then they go to the government function for the quality assurance review. We then move into the public consultation phase and make revisions after the consultation based on the feedback that's received. The updated version is then re-endorsed by the TEG and reviewed by the government function again before they are published.